Regarding this matter, my client is free now.
Turkey releases American pastor Andrew Brunson from house arrest after 2 years. Brunson is on his way back to the United States.
There are reports of new evidence a Saudi journalist for the Washington Post was killed by his own government, and that's despite Saudi Arabia's denials.
A cardinal linked to the Catholic Church's sex abuse scandal resigns directly to Pope Francis. But is he really leaving the church?
And Hurricane Michael gone but not forgotten. So much to clean up and more than a dozen people killed in several states.
From the I24NEWS studios in Times Square in New York, this is Crossroads with David Schuster and Tal Heinrich.
Welcome, everyone. David Schuster is off tonight. Derek Dennis joins me here. Great to have you, as always.
Thanks.
We begin with Turkey releasing an American pastor held under house arrest for almost 2 years.
Evangelical pastor Andrew Brunson was arrested in Turkey following a failed coup attempt in 2016. He was charged with aiding terrorist groups and espionage, but is denied all charges from the very beginning.
A Turkish court sentenced Brunson to 3 years, 1 month, and 15 days in prison, but ordered his release for good behavior and time served.
As I said, he is now free. The electronic tag will be removed and his house arrest was lifted. He will be able to travel abroad.
Brunson is on his way home now. First, he'll undergo a medical screening in Germany and then home to the United States. He's from North Carolina, although he's lived in Turkey for more than 20 years.
You know, this case is just another twist in the complex relationship between Turkey and the United States. Senior diplomatic correspondent Nina Larson takes a look at why Ankara and Washington have been at odds.
The US-Turkey alliance has hung in the balance for several months over one man, Pastor Andrew Brunson. Brunson's headed home, but tensions remain. Presidents Trump and Erdogan are strongmen with style in common, but in substance, dangerously poles apart. Since Trump was elected, the US and Turkey have lurched from crisis to crisis, foreshadowed by Erdogan's security detail tackling protesters to the ground just after his White House visit. The Brunson case escalated the rift. The expat was caught in Erdogan's dragnet following an attempted coup in 2016.
I will say that the reason why the United States seem to care about him so much, particularly about him, is also the fact that he's an evangelical.
The Turks wanted alleged coup leader Fethullah Gulen extradited from Pennsylvania in exchange for Brunson. The deadlock led to mutual sanctions and more threats, sending the lira into freefall. But two areas of possible détente emerged: Manbij in Syria, where the US and Turkey are training for joint patrols, and the fight against ISIS. Turkey hosts US and NATO jets bound for Iraq and Syria at Incirlik Air Base.
We now know that in the long term, the U.S. is suggesting that it does plan on staying in Syria, or at least maintaining its sphere of influence in Syria, which effectively means continuing its relationship with the Kurds there. And that's going to be problematic for Turkey.
Could the two cooperate on the disappearance of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi?
They would both like to see the Saudis accountable for this. So I do think that we will see, and we are seeing already, cooperation between the intelligence agencies.
Once close NATO allies, but right now, for Washington and Ankara, it's complicated.
For more, let's bring in senior diplomatic correspondent Nina Larson. Nina, now that Andrew Brunson has been released, what gestures could the United States make in return?
Well, the main gestures, Tal, would be economic ones, lifting some sanctions, relaxing some trade tariffs, which really hit Turkey hard, and basically assisting with the Turkish economy. That's the kind of help that Turkey really needs at the moment. The lira has plunged by 40%. Inflation is extremely high. And, ordinary people in Turkey are very concerned about this.
And Nina, could we also see a closer cooperation between the U.S. and Turkey in post-conflict Syria?
Very likely. This is a long-term project, but as I said in the piece, the U.S. and Turkish troops are already training to conduct joint patrols in Manbij, and that's a very controversial area. It's very Kurd-dominated, but that's a really good sign. Turkey also will want to see some restrictions lifted on some arms deals that it has pending. And, you know, looking towards the military side of things, I think this is an area where Turkey and the US can cooperate, and particularly in the long-term future of Syria. Neither power at the end of the day wants to see Russia or Iran dominate that part of the world.
All right, that's our senior diplomatic correspondent, Nina Larson, in Washington. Thanks, Nina.
And we want to discuss it further with Alon Ben-Meir here on set with us, professor and senior fellow at New York University's Center for Global Affairs. Welcome, Alon. Is this a big win for the Trump administration, the fact that a pastor has been released without the United States having to extradite Fethullah Gulen?
Yeah, you might say that it's a win. I'm not sure how big it is. Erdogan has been under tremendous pressure. The sanctions been biting, and he really didn't have much choice. The economy is almost on the verge of collapse. So he decided this is a good time to do so. And doing so in the wake of what's happening in connection with the journalists that's been also possibly been killed by the Saudis, I think the timing was not coincidental, yes.
Alon, Brunson maintained his innocence throughout this ordeal, you know, even though he was being held on house arrest on the charges of terrorism and espionage. The Trump administration, what was the maneuvering, do you think, behind the scenes? What brought this about?
Well, you know, the Erdogan's been asking the United States to extradite the Fethullah Gulen, who's been self-exiled in Pennsylvania for some time now, been accused to have been behind the coup of July 2016. But the Turkish government never produced any kind of significant, credible evidence to the fact that he was involved in that conflict. So the United States took a position, this is not going to happen. This actually happened also during the Obama administration. And for Erdogan to try to bully Trump in this regard, it was a mistake on his part. And certainly someone like Trump doesn't like to be bullied. And I think eventually Erdogan came to the conclusion that if he wants to restore some kind of relationship, a relationship with the United States, he's going to have to do that. My feeling is, if I may add something, this is not limited just to the arrest and the incarceration of Brunson, but also to the general behavior of the Turkish government. We have to remember, today in Turkey, more than 200 journalists are in jail. Yeah. Tens of thousands other who've been accused of being associated with the Golan Heights are in jail. The United States ought to go beyond just release of Brunson and begin to deal with the horrible dictatorship that's taken place in Turkey, and that is, I think, extremely important.
Right. Even before the case of the Turkish pastor's imprisonment, I think we could have said that Trump and Erdogan have somewhat been on a collision course. It's pretty clear why Erdogan was under a lot of pressure from the United States, but why is it important for the U.S. to maintain a good relationship with Turkey? Well,
we are, so to speak, between the hammer and the hard rock. So, the Turkey is a member of NATO. We've had alliance with Turkey going back decades. And so there's a great deal of cooperation in the past and continue to be. So the United States still view Turkey as a significant power in the region, particularly potentially playing a role in Syria and in the Balkans and other places. The United States would like to maintain that kind of bilateral relationship, which has been positive over the many years in the past. But it has been deteriorating, and unfortunately, and I should say very sadly, that the United States, that the Trump administration in particular, has not confronted Erdogan because of his gross violation of human rights in Turkey. And the irony is today that Erdogan's trying to revive to become a member of the EU. It's really funny, it's ridiculous, in fact, when in fact he's doing everything totally and completely inconsistent with the EU requirement when it comes especially to human rights.
All right, Alon Ben-Meir, thank you for this, but do stick around with us because we want your take on the next story after the break. Coming up here on Crossroads, reports say Turkey has audio and video evidence that show journalist Jamal Khashoggi was killed inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. Khashoggi, a sharp critic of the Saudi government, went missing over a week ago.
Plus, grounded. The entire fleet of F-35 fighter jets worldwide can't fly until they undergo inspection. U.S. officials prompted by a crash last month in South Carolina. The latest ahead.